I think today I'd like to talk about mortality and the middle way. Of course, we're just going to kind of take a glimpse, mortality and the middle way. It's probably very deep, and it's probably something that a person could explore for the rest of their life. So for us to have fully penetrated it in these few minutes that we're going to spend together might be unrealistic, but we can take a little peek here this morning. You know, when I was thinking about what I talked to you about, digging around in my own mind, trying to figure out what resonates for me, what's relevant, and what came to me was this question. What would it mean if I were to discover that this was my last week to live? Now, that might sound a bit grim, but I'm not the first one to contemplate death as a practical practice. I'll start off with a reading here after that question. You folks may remember I like to read from the Sin Ming, very short booklet, translation by Richard B. Clark. He used to teach out on the East Coast. Just going to read a few verses, not the entire thing. The great way is not difficult for those not attached to preferences. When neither love nor hate arises, all is clear and undisguised. Separate by the smallest amount, however, and you are as far from it as heaven is from earth. If you wish to know the truth, then hold to no opinions for or against anything. To set up what you like against what you dislike is the disease of the mind. The fundamental nature of things is not recognized. When the fundamental nature of things is not recognized, the mind's essential peace is disturbed to no avail. The way is perfect. Capital W. The way is perfect, as vast space is perfect, where nothing is lacking and nothing is in excess. Indeed, it is due to our grasping and rejecting that we do not know the true nature of things. Live neither in the entanglements of outer things, nor in ideas or feelings of emptiness. Be serene and at one with things, and erroneous views will disappear by themselves. When you try to stop activity to achieve quietude, your very effort fills you with activity. As long as you remain attached to one extreme or another, you will never know oneness. Those who do not live in the single way cannot be free in either activity or quietude, in assertion or denial. That said, I'm going to repeat this opening question that I had that kind of led me to this topic of mortality in the middle way. What would it mean if I were to discover that this was my last week to live? So, I guess to kind of dig into this, perhaps we could contrast two extremes. On one extreme, knowing that I have 1 week to live, I could be of the mind to say, it's time to eat, drink, and be merry. Selfish, self-serving, shallow, grasping, I'm going to fill my pockets up with all I can get before I go out. That's on one side. And perhaps to contrast it, on the other side, a person might become solemn, very solemn, darkly quiet, perhaps giving up. Why even try or do anything? So we have those two extremes. I find it kind of interesting that when I explore these elements of our practice and of the Dharma, of living, I guess, in general too, but specifically the Dharma, language, as we use words to describe these things, sometimes things can appear like a paradox, duality. Words can never really express fully the actuality and experience of our practice, of us living our lives. But it's what we have to, what I have right now to communicate with you, my understanding. And as I was contemplating that question, what would it mean if I were to discover that this was my last week to live? Something also kind of came to my mind after a while, and this was an insight that perhaps every day is my last day. And that each day is also my very first day. Paradox, contrasts, words. I'll repeat that. Every day is my last day. And each day is also my very first day. Perhaps this statement can kind of bring us a little bit closer to looking deeper into mortality and the middle way. There is a story of a woman named Sujata. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Meeting the Buddha in the early days. Just a brief history of the early days in the Buddha's life, as I understand it. He was a prince, living quite lavishly. He saw some things that set him on the quest to want to be a spiritual seeker and perhaps learn how to navigate suffering, human suffering. He went to various teachers after leaving the palace to learn from them, staying for a while, mastering that teacher's technique, staying with another one, mastering that technique, and then staying with another one, mastering that technique. But he still found them unsatisfactory. So at some point, as I understand it, he began wandering with 4 other spiritual seekers, and their practice was to deny the body, to eat as little as possible, deny themselves comforts. And I guess this was 6 years in of his search, and he went off away from his fellow seekers to sit for a while, and by that time he was quite emaciated, very skinny from not eating. And this woman, the farmer's wife, Sujata, it was her practice to come to the grove, I guess, and to offer a dish of food. Well, this morning she came and there was the Buddha sitting there looking like a skeleton. And so she offered him a bowl of milk and rice. Thankfully, he had come to the conclusion that this extreme practice of denying the body food, sleep, comforts, had gone too far, and he might be at the end. So it would be in his best interest to accept this bowl of milk rice to save his life. Having accepted this bowl of rice milk, he was refreshed, but at the same time his fellow spiritual seekers saw him, I guess they called him a cheater because he was having a little something on the side, and they left him alone, disgusted with the fact that he'd gone off what they thought was the path. So, you see, he left the palace, a life of luxury, excess, any sort of sensual pleasure a person could want was laid at his feet. He left that to be a spiritual seeker, and now he was a spiritual seeker on the verge of death, and accepted the rice milk because he realized that he had gone to the opposite extreme, which was not serving the purpose of reaching an understanding of suffering and the ending of suffering. So that night, he practiced and was awakened, and in the morning he went off to teach. Thankfully. And now we have this practice. Because the Buddha saw for himself, and I'm thinking taught along the way, that the middle way is the best way for us to take care of our practice and take care of our lives. So I'd like to read for you again, this time from the Dhammapada. It's a collection of the Buddha's teachings. I've heard it called the greatest hits. Let's see. I'm going to read chapter 20, and chapter 20 is called The Path. The path. The spiritual path is the eightfold path. The truths are the Four Noble Truths. This is the path for purity of vision. Follow it. Following it protects you from temptation. Following this path leads to the end of suffering. This truth was declared once Buddha learned how to pull the arrow out of suffering. You must do your own work. A Buddha can only guide you. By entering the path, seekers can transcend all pain. When through your own effort you see that everything arises and passes away, you will see the true nature of suffering and be able to let go of it. This is the path to purity. When through your own efforts you see that all dharmas are impersonal, you will be able to let go of attachment. This is the path to purity. The person who does not do the work when she is young and strong, the person who is idle, loose in how he spends his days and in what he thinks, that lazy one will never find the path to freedom. Be heedful of your words, restraining in your thinking. Do not let your body harm. Do these things sincerely, and you will attain freedom, just as the Buddha did. Last Tuesday, I was preparing for a midday nap, maybe a little later in the afternoon. I received a phone call, and I was rocked by it. I'd been experiencing some financial tensions, and I had taken steps to resolve the issue, and things are moving ahead pretty well. I was almost there. Answered the phone, listening, dream shattered. It's over. What I had put so many hours into and hopes into, I was told was not going to work. I could feel myself spiraling into a dark mood of hopelessness. What am I going to do now? Eventually, I did fall asleep, and I think it was needed. After waking up, I slowly started to process the phone call and the situation, thinking about what's going to happen in the future. And as I was kind of mulling all of this over, what kind of arose to the surface was a sense of gratitude. Somehow, I could recall that I have a lot in my life to be grateful for. This one disappointment does not erase all of that. But when it did happen, I couldn't see that. But in processing after this nap, after gratitude, I started to recall and appreciate that there are so many wonderful people in my life. Earlier, I had been invited to dinner with a colleague that I've known over the years, and it was wonderful to spend some time with this person. They invited me to perhaps speak to their colleagues about mindfulness. Maybe a couple days later, a young man invited me to lunch, and we talked, and he was telling me how much he enjoyed a dinner we had had years ago. And I invited him and several of the men I considered friends. And being there in that group, he said, changed his outlook on life, and he saw the bigger picture and took his life in another direction. And he was asking me for this lunch because he really appreciated the time spent together. After this loss and being rocked and feeling hopeless as I was processing this, I could remember or realize that, you know what? Back in the old days, had something like this happened to me, I'd have gone straight back to alcohol and drugs. Just a few words in my ear, negative circumstances, reach for the drugs, reach for the alcohol, which for me, when I was living in San Diego, always led back to dire circumstances and even imprisonment. But something about the way I've been living my life, following this practice, following the middle way, practicing Zazen, meeting with you folks, something about all of this allowed me to protect myself and my life by not using under that circumstance. And I began to realize that it wasn't so much the circumstance that had unfolded, the negative news that I've gotten. It was my expectation that I was going to get that trophy. Everything was going my way. I was going to be able to resolve this problem. And all of that collapsed and took me under for a bit. But I learned from that experience that it was my expectation that led me to the toxic shock of disappointment. So let us take another look at that original question. What would it mean if I were to discover that this was my last week to live? What would it mean to me? What am I supposed to do? And another kind of question came to me as far as looking into that question, the first question. If I have been living an upright life, a life that honored the Four Noble Truths, a life that honored the Noble Eightfold Path, a life that honored the 5 precepts, if I had honored all of this in my life, my daily life, as best as I could as a human being trying to practice and navigate the ups and downs of living this precious life of ours, if I had done my best to honor those things and live as closely to them as I understood, would there really be any desperate need for me to make drastic changes in my life just because it's my last week? You folks know that when I talk to you most times, I try to remember to encourage you to remain strong in your Zazen practice. I say this because in my understanding, when we sit Zazen, as we've done earlier today, and you folks probably do quite regularly, I'm asking you to remain diligent with that. Because as I understand it, when we sit Zazen, it is the unification of the body and the mind. And it is this unification of the body and the mind that allows us to cultivate the art of settling into present moment, compassionate awareness. And settling into that, we take this with us when we rise from the cushion. And live this mortal life along the middle way. I have one last reading for you from the Dhammapada. Before we close here. And this reading comes from chapter 24, called Craving. Having uprooted craving, I have overcome every desire. I understand. I am detached. I have let go. I have freed myself from moral defilements. Truly understanding the Four Noble Truths, who shall I call teacher? And I guess I'm reading that to remind us that when we delve into these things and we maintain our practice with sincerity, self-compassion, our very life in our practice becomes the middle way and protects us and connects us inseparably. Thank you.